the expert talk by distinguished Professor Mayank Srivastav sir, Associate Professor, Department of Electronic System Engineering at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Sir, it is our pleasure to have you here at our institute. Today's talk session will be in two parts. First session will be on the topic why PhD, breaking the myth and the misconception about PhD. And the second session is on atomic orbital overlap engineering for 3D, 2D contacts and record high performance 2D transistors. I would like to request Professor Vijay Janyani sir, Department Electronics and Communication Engineering, MNIT Jaipur, to present bouquet to Professor Mayank Srivastav sir. Thank you so much, sir. Let's begin with a brief introduction of our eminent guest. Professor Mayank Srivastav is a faculty member at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and co-founder of Agnit Semiconductors Private Limited. He is also instrumental in setting up a 300 crore worth gallium nitride prototyping fab and leading a national effort on 2D material technology hub. He received his PhD from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay 2010. From his PhD work, he received the Excellence in Research Award and the Industrial Impact Award from IIT Bombay in 2010. He is among the first recipient of the Indian section of the American TR35 Award 2010 and the first Indian to receive IEEE EDS Early Career Award 2015. He is also an editor of IEEE Transaction on Electronic Device. Besides, he is an IEEE Electronic Device Society Distinguished Lecturer and an elected member of IEEE EDS Board of Governors. He is the recipient of the prestigious DST Swan Jayanti Fellowship, Abdul Kalam Technology Innovation National Fellowship from INAE SERB 2021, and the Vashvik Award 2021. He has received several other national awards and honors of high rapper like National Academy of Science, India, Young Scientist Platinum Jubilee Award 2018, Indian National Academy of Science, Young Scientist Award 2018, the Indian National Academy of Engineering Innovator Entrepreneur Award 2018, Indian National Academy of Engineering Young Engineer Award, INAE Young Associate, Indian Academy of Science Young Associate 2018-2023, Ministry of Electronics and Amplified Information Technology, Young Faculty Fellowship. Besides, he received Best Paper Awards from several international conferences like Intel Corporation Asia Academic Forum, VLSI Design Conference, and Electrostatic Discharge and Electrical Overstress Synopsis. Professor Srivastav broadly works on application of emerging material like gallium nitride, atomically thin two-dimensional material like graphene and TMDC in electronic and electro-optic devices, working closely to its fundamental limits. Currently, his group is developing a few atom-thick devices, amplifiers, circuit, gallium nitride-based ultra-high power devices with high reliability and devices circuits for operation at terahertz frequencies. Besides, his group also works on developing novel ESD and high voltage device concept in advanced CMOS nodes. He held visiting position in Inferno Technologies, Munich, Germany from April 2008 to October 2008 and from May 2010 to July 2010. He worked for Inferno Technologies, East Fishkill, New York, USA, IBM Microelectronics, Burlington, VT, USA, Intel Mobile Communication, Hopewell Junction, New York, USA, Intel Corporation, Mobile and Communication Group, Munich, Germany between 2010 and 2013. He joined the Indian Institute of Science as a faculty member in 2013. Professor Srivastava work has resulted in over 190 peer-reviewed publications. 47 of these papers are in IRPS and IETM, and the two most prestigious conferences of IEEE EDS, and around 100 journals such as IEEE TED, and 47 patents. Most of these patents are either licensed by the semiconductor companies or used in their products. Now I would like to request Professor Mayank Srivastava to share some knowledge about the topics. Please give warm welcome to the sir. Sir, please.
Okay, all set. Okay, thank you. Good morning and actually good afternoon now. So thanks a lot for being here. The first topic is a little generic, and the genesis of this topic is twofold. One is in ISC, some of us wanted to increase awareness about PhD, and that's when a committee was set up and I was made chair of that committee. And second part is that there's a lot of myths around PhD, myths and misconceptions around PhD, and I've been writing about it at different forums, including social media like LinkedIn. And I thought when this committee was formed and when we hosted our first session, where I gave a talk, and that talk is there on YouTube, that was a short, quick talk. The thought was that, why not, if I'm traveling to different places to give a technical talk, why not give a generic talk on PhD and research and increase awareness. I don't know how many of you would have read my writings on LinkedIn. Anyone here? Okay, at least few. So, I mean, you would have noticed I don't write cozy words. I write reality, right? And that's what I'm going to talk about. So here is the agenda. I'll quickly show you, various misconceptions, myths which are present in our system. I'll not talk about it in the beginning. We'll first talk about, what is PhD, why one should do PhD, who should pursue PhD, right? and then I'll talk about some of the opportunities, post PhD global opportunities per se. Just in those 15 minutes when I was in the guest house, I added a slide on return on investment. There is something which some students asked me when I gave this talk last week at IIT Hyderabad. And I realized that the younger crowd is very much keen about return on investment. So I'll talk about the return on investment as well, which is not listed as a line item in the agenda. And then I'll get into the details of the myths and the misconceptions. And feel free to ask any question, and feel free to disagree with me. I don't mind when people disagree with me. This is a forum where
So the video is also going live, so it is possible. The voice is
Okay. Okay. So, okay, my mobility has been confined. I've been trapped to this confined state, but I hope that does not affect the rigor of the talk. So, as I said, just to repeat for the online audience quickly, the genesis is twofold. A lot of myths and misconceptions and negative writings at various places, including LinkedIn. And I keep a note of various myths and misconceptions. Some of you would have seen my writings on LinkedIn. And the second is in ISC we formed a committee to increase awareness about PhD and research, and I was made the chair of that committee. And I thought that if I'm traveling around, why not give a generic talk on this topic before a technical talk? So here is the agenda, as I said, and I'll talk about, before I get into the myths, as I mentioned, I'll talk about why one should pursue PhD, who should pursue PhD, and as I said, I also added a line item on the return on investment, which is something which the younger crowd is quite interested about. And then in the end, I'll talk about or I'll elaborate on the myths and the misconceptions. And feel free to ask any question that you have when we are discussing the myths. So the list is long, right? And of course, you can add, and I'll collect your questions, and that becomes additional line items in this list of myths. So as I said, the list is long, and my job is to clarify, or address these myths and clarify all the misconceptions. And in the process, though explicitly not covered, I'll also touch base on how to become a good researcher, how to become a successful researcher, how you see PhD as a process of training for you to become an independent researcher. So let's get into this topic, PhD process and publication. I had written about this some time back in length and breadth at various forums, and this was further re-triggered when I heard discussions on number of papers to be published to get a PhD award. I'm sure all of you would have. By the way, how many of you are PhD students here? Okay, and how many are aspiring PhDs in future? Okay, how many of these are undergraduates? Is there any undergraduate here? Okay, no undergraduate. How many of you are master's students? Okay. Tell your undergraduate friends or juniors to watch this when this is posted on YouTube. The proportion of misconception increases as you go further down. So it's little less among PhDs, it's a little more among masters, and it's much more across undergraduates. Okay, so so what is PhD? Let's first understand this, right? I mean, is this a job? Is this another degree course? Is this another course which where you have a certain things well defined, predefined, and you just do chuck, and you pass certain exams and you get a degree, or is something else? In my view, PhD is a training program that trains you to become an independent researcher. Now, think of your childhood. You were trained on many things for the first time. In PhD, you are trained to become independent researcher for the first time. That's the first time you are trained on something called being independent researcher. Now go back when you were a kid. right? Some of you would have learned the basics, say learned writing skills or reading skills, maybe, in few months or few years. Some would have taken more time, some would have taken less time, right? So anything which is a training process, the time required is a function of, certain background, and the way the training is offered, how much effort you put into, and basic aptitude towards that particular training. It's not that you cannot learn. Pretty much everyone can get into that training and graduate through that training process. But the this the rate at which you learn and the time in which you graduate in that training process always vary. Anything that you learn, the same happens here, right? So PhD is a training process. The end goal of this process is to make you an independent researcher. Now again, what do I mean by researcher? The researcher term does not mean that you become, of course, as a process, you will become expert in a given field. But here the term researcher does not mean that you are taught in breadth and depth a particular topic. That's a process that you follow, right? Learning something is the vehicle of this process. What you are learning, the term researcher here means that you are now trained to research any topic, any subject, whether it is science, engineering, or philosophy, or social sciences, right? If you have learned how to explore unknowns, right? The unknown can be anything tomorrow, right? The unknown can be another problem statement from your field of research in which you pursued PhD. The unknown could be any other subject, any other topic. It could also be a topic of something which is not related to science and engineering, right? So this is what the objective of the term researcher, or the definition of the term researcher here, right? Independent researcher means you are trained to become an explorer in an independent capacity. So you don't need any help, you don't need any supervision, you don't need any guidance. You should be able to break the problem into bits and pieces and define how you pursue that problem on your own and get to the end of the problem, which is the solution of the problem. The problem could be a scientific problem, the problem could be an engineering problem, the problem could be a technological problem, the problem could also be a life problem or social sciences problem, right? So here the idea is that you become an independent explorer. Now, so if this is the definition, then when a PhD degree should be granted? It should be granted when you demonstrate your ability to conduct independent research, right? So now this ability you can develop, as this is a training process, this ability you can develop in 3 years, in 4 years, in 5 years, and some may take longer. It's a function of various parameters, right? Now, what about the other parameters? So now in this process of demonstration, you conduct research, right? So you have to demonstrate the ability to conduct independent research. So for which you have to conduct research, right? So you have to conduct research under supervision, under guidance, and then gradually you mature and graduate, and gradually you become independent. Like when you started learning, the writing skills, when you learned your first letters, right? Somebody was holding your hand, right? And gradually you were graduated to do it on your own. The same here. The job of your research supervisor in the beginning is to hold your hand, and gradually, right, graduate you to a point where you can do everything on your own. When you learn, riding a bicycle, somebody was holding the bicycle from the back, right? And the best trainer leaves the bicycle without telling you that he has left. The same is the job of the research supervisor. So he is holding your hand in the beginning, and gradually you will not realize when he has left your hand, and you have started doing, or you have continued doing your research more independently. And when people observe that you are now able to do things independently, you should be graduated, right? So let's understand this further, right? So in this process of demonstration, you have to conduct research. In the process of learning bicycle riding independently, you have to ride bicycle. right? It's not like, it's not like a theory lesson that somebody teaches you that, okay, you do this, and then you get on the bicycle. You have to get on the bicycle to learn how to ride bicycle independently, right? So initially under a very close guidance, and eventually towards the end almost independently. Just think of the way, you learned riding a bicycle. It's in the very similar process, right? So here the end has no fixed timelines. Some of you would have learned, riding bicycle independently within 3-4 days. Some would have taken more than a couple of weeks, right? So it's just a function of your own aptitude, capabilities, and certain intrinsic parameters, but everyone can get to that point, right? The aptitude to explore is always present. It's just that you have to figure it out, right? Now, some may learn this art, the art, what I mean by art is the art of doing science independently, the art of doing exploration independently in a couple of years, and some may take a little longer, right? Some may take even longer. It all depends on the nature of the problem, the area, the individual's aptitude, analytical ability to explore, and so on. So all of you have these things, these abilities to a certain extent. So your initial point always vary, and that defines how much time you will take. And to an extent also depends on the problem statement, right? I mean, if you start with a difficult problem, sometimes it takes a little longer to break the problem into bits and pieces before you get to a point where you have a clue how to solve the problem. Now, what about the publications? I did not talk about the publications. How many publications for you to get a PhD degree? Now, in this process of conducting research and later conducting independent research, what do? You solve a problem, right? So if you're working on a problem, your objective is to solve a problem, initially with some help and gradually without any help. But bottom line is you're solving a problem, you're trying to solve a problem. So in this process, what do? You discover, innovate, invent, or find answers to some fundamental unsolved questions, unsolved mysteries. So if you have discovered, if you have innovated, if you have invented, if you have answers, some new answers to fundamental questions, you want to communicate that with the rest of the world, right? So how do you communicate? If I have discovered something, I want to tell the rest of the world that I have discovered this, and give opportunity to the peer group to evaluate whether my discovery makes sense, right? And if their evaluation is or if I qualify, or if my work qualifies into their evaluation, right? They say, okay, this is something which should be told to rest of the world. So my communication is the manuscript. The peer group evaluation is the review. And when it is approved to be communicated with the rest of the world is a publication, right? So there's no question of how many publications, how many papers. Some problem statements can, the solution to some problems can be communicated with single paper. Solution to some problems may require, to be broken into multiple pieces, and therefore you may have to communicate, at different instances. Some very difficult problems may require you to break it into pieces, and, as soon as you have achieved a certain milestone, you communicate, as far as your storyline is conclusive, right? So there's no discussion about number of papers here. The paper is a byproduct of the research that you conduct, right? And you can have n number of byproducts. If they are not making any impact to the community, the peer community, they are of no use. And if they are making an impact, even if you have published one paper, that's more than enough, right? Now, always this discussion comes that, okay, why publication is required, not required, things of that kind. So think in this way, that if the paper is a byproduct, and if you have conducted research, right, and if you have taken your research to a conclusive stage, then as a byproduct, a paper will naturally come out. Then why there is a worry or a question that how many papers, right? You demonstrate that you have conducted research, and your internal community will review whether you have conducted research independently towards the end or not. And if that assessment is there, you should be granted a PhD. Sometimes a paper may take a little longer. As I said, the paper is a byproduct, right? The PhD should be given for you to demonstrate your ability to conduct research, independent research. And paper is a byproduct. So, the byproduct may take a little longer to come in public domain, right? But if you have proven your ability, then you should be granted a PhD, right? So the focus has to be on proving that ability. The focus has to be on conducting independent research or going through this journey, this process, where eventually you can conduct independent research and solve some of the fundamental questions, right? Work on some of the fundamental problems, give solution to some of the fundamental questions, right? So again, the last point is there's no limit on how many papers one should publish. One impactful paper is infinitely times better than thousands of bogus papers, right? I mean, I keep on seeing on LinkedIn people, post, I'm glad to inform my paper got accepted in this XYZ random conference or XYZ random journal. What's the point? If your paper is not solving something which is fundamental, something which is useful, something which is, if your paper is not going to be referred by peers, right, then there's no point having such a paper, right? So the impact of a journal does not decide whether the work is bogus or impactful. Again, there's always a discussion on the impact factor of the journal, right? Impact factor is a different parameter, but that does not mean that every paper that comes in a high impact journal will be of high impact. Similarly, if a paper comes in a low impact journal, does not mean that a paper would be of low impact. Sometimes a paper in a low impact journal, low impact factor journal, not low impact journal, low impact factor journal could be of high impact, right? So again, you should not be too worried about where my paper comes. As far as the paper comes at a place which is considered as international journal, visible to all the peers, and your peers are reading papers from that journal, you should be good enough, right? So as a starter, as I mentioned that, starter, you may want to look at where the best minds in that specific area publish, right? So, if you want to decide where you want to communicate your work, figure out where the best minds of your field publish. So your target should be to publish in those journals, and if your work is good, your work will be accepted in those journals. Now let's try to understand the chronology and how these things are dependent or independent to each other, right? So if you understand this carefully, the point 1 is the definition of PhD. The point 2 is the core of what is a fundamental requirement to get a PhD degree, which is demonstrate your ability to conduct independent research, right? Point 3, the process that one goes through. So this is the process, which is, initially you are working under a close guidance, and then, at somewhere in between, you and your supervisor becomes, or you and your supervisor become a colleague, a co-worker to each other, right? Where you and your supervisor are learning from each other. Think in this way, that in the beginning you are learning from your supervisor is holding your hand. In the second stage, both of you are working together, both of you are working on a problem where both of you discuss, try to come up with something better, right? Both of you are learning from each other, right? So you are like a co-worker. And the last stage, where you are working independently and your supervisor is learning from you, right? So the stage, when you achieve that stage where you are able to demonstrate something which others have not demonstrated independently, and you are able to basically contribute more than your supervisor on that particular problem, you are called an independent researcher, and that's the stage when you can be granted a PhD degree, right? So as I said, point 3 is the process one has to go through, and point 4 is nothing but the byproduct. Justify that you have gone through it, right? Now, how will you justify it to outside world? See, one aspect is that you want to communicate about the outcome of your research, right? So if I have discovered something, I want to tell the whole world that I've discovered something, and I want to get this recorded somewhere, right? That's a paper, that's a byproduct, that's a paper. But the second part, if you talk about the procedure, certain procedures, certain protocols, certain method need to be followed in any system, university system, institute system, whatnot, right? Then the point 4 is also to justify that you have gone through the process, right? What is that process? Which is 3, and 3 to justify that you have basically, you have achieved 2, and whereas the 5.5 clarifies the limit in terms of how many papers, right? And as I said, there is no limit, right? It can be just one paper. One good paper is more than enough. Okay, so this is in a nutshell what PhD process is, and somewhere in this process, what's the role of a publication. Now, why one should do PhD, right? So again, I read a lot of discussions, and often undergraduate students write that you do PhD if you don't get a job. So it's unfortunate, but that's why I'm here to clarify. Now, the first point I think you should be clear now. PhD is to train yourself to become an independent researcher. And here the definition, as I said, of researcher is not somebody who has developed depth and breadth in a given field, right? Of course, as a process, you will develop depth and breadth in a field in which you are pursuing PhD. But the researcher, as I said, is someone who is able to explore unknowns. Okay, now today the unknowns are something, tomorrow the unknowns could be something else. 10 years down the line, the unknowns could be something else, right? I may be trained as an engineer, right? But if I'm an independent researcher, if I'm trained explorer, 10 years down the line, I can become a theoretical physicist. 20 years down the line, I may become a social scientist. Completely up to me, if I know how to do that, right? Now, the other aspect is to learn how to solve a problem independently. And this problem can be anything. It could be, science problem related to your field, problem related to other fields, problem related to life, social science problems, right? For example, what I'm doing today through this talk is trying to solve a social problem, right? I'm not giving a technical talk. Now, again, to learn how to master an area independently, right? So if you want to master an area, and when I say master an area means, you understand that area in length and breadth, you know everything in and out about that area, and then you are able to apply that knowledge in solving problems, right? Just having textbook knowledge is not good enough. So from mastery, I mean that you are able to apply that knowledge to solve problems, right? Come up with better things. To acquire expertise in the field, that's the process that you go through during your PhD. So, few years after your PhD, if you have done well, you will become, known as one of the expert in that field. And that leads to the next point, to push yourself to be counted among a few handful experts around the world. I asked this question, I was giving this similar session to MTech students in ISC. These are, students who would have acquired top few hundred gate rank. And I asked them that, you go back and check if there is, you are aware of any of your seniors. Exceptions can always be there, but in general, any of your seniors who are known as experts, well-known experts in the world, right? Why? Because, they settled after a certain level. They did not push themselves beyond. So PhD gives you an opportunity to push yourself to a point where you can be counted among a few handful experts around the world. And if this happens, then you can also have an exponential career growth, right? And this career growth could be, as an independent expert, researcher, scientist. It could be anywhere. It could be in academia. It could be R&D labs. It could be industry. And of course, to tap into a number of academic and industrial opportunities. So once you have a good PhD, and from what do I mean by good PhD? good PhD does not mean PhD from a certain rank institute in the world, right? Good PhD means a PhD where you have contributed something which is meaningful for your peer group, for rest of the community, right? For your scientific community, right? And if you have contributed to that extent, you can tap into any number of opportunities. The growth could be exponential. It never saturates. And of course, then you can also grow as a leader in a given field, right? So there are many advantages of doing PhD, but then the question comes is who should pursue PhD, right? First of all, those who are able to ask these three fundamental questions: what, why, how. So those who are curious and willing to explore, right? If you're not curious, if you are not willing to explore, then this is not the right path for you, or this is not the path for you, right? So how do you judge whether you're curious? Think about yourself, when, for example, when you're in school, when you were in college, right? Or in general, outside, are you asking questions? Are you asking questions about things which are not very clear, or you accept things as facts and figures? If you're asking questions, and again, asking questions not to trouble people, but asking questions, asking genuine questions. If you're asking genuine questions, right? If you're not satisfied with the explanations given, and if you are willing to dig deeper, right, then you have the aptitude to explore, right? Now, other thing is those who are critical about anything and everything, those who are willing to ask questions. So now, what is this aspect about critical? As I said, are you accepting things as facts and figures, or you are thinking beyond what is told? Are you debating yourself? Are you arguing yourself, whatever is told to you, whether that makes sense or not? For example, you go back to your chemistry lectures. A lot of chemistry which was taught to you was not perfectly correct or accurate. But in school, you are not at that level that you can be told the exact chemistry. How many of you remember the Schrodinger wave equation in class 12th? It was there in your curriculum, but nobody taught you, because that requires good understanding of quantum mechanics, and majority of school teachers may not have brushed it up, or even if they have brushed it up, the school kids are not mature to an extent where they can learn quantum mechanics, right? So now think about it, that how many of you questioned why we are not taught this topic? How many of you were happy? Chalo, ek bala chuti. Right? So similarly, this is one example, right? Similarly, think about yourself, that when something is told to you, are you questioning it? Right? Are you trying to put some, or are you basically applying certain logic? Are you trying to quantify whatever is told to you with a certain logic? And if the logic is not making sense, are you questioning it? If you have that aptitude, then you are the right candidate. In general, I have noticed that many of you have that aptitude, but as you grow, because of various conditions and the way we are taught things in school, this aptitude is suppressed. And this is why, for example, I always encourage that let kids ask whatever at an early age, whatever question they want to ask. Let it be as stupid as possible, but let them ask questions. If they're asking questions, they're developing this aptitude of asking questions. They're asking questions because something is not clear to them, right? And if something is not clear to them, is not always because they are dumb, or would not always because they are dumb. It can also be because they may have a different thought. So let your thoughts come out. So if that happens to you, if you are attentive in classroom, if you're asking questions when things are not very clear to you, if you think that it should be differently, you are the right candidate, right? And then of course, just having these aptitudes are not good enough. So you need both talent and ability to work hard. So you should be willing to get into the depth of the subject and learn complex skills, right? So if you're pursuing PhD, as I said, you're trying to become an independent research. In that process, you are trying to solve a problem, right? So you're conducting research, and for conducting research, you take a vehicle, right? So the problem given to you is just a vehicle, right? You could be working on signal processing, some problem related to signal processing. You could be working on some problem related to microelectronics, quantum physics, whatnot, right? But that problem is just a vehicle for you to follow that process. But even to drive that vehicle, you have to learn how to drive that vehicle. You have to learn skills, learn the subject to understand the problem first, right? So you need to have the willingness to get in the depth of the subject and learn complex skill sets, because you will use these skill sets to basically probe the problem, to understand the problem, to solve the problem. And then those who are willing to uncover, explore unknowns. Now, I have sometimes have seen that students, come with these ideas that can we do this and then this and then this and then we can write a paper. If the conclusion is already known, then there's no research, right? Your research means you're trying to probe certain unknowns. You're getting into an unknown territory. You're getting into an unexplored territory. If you're getting into an unexplored, unknown territory, you don't know the end. You don't know where, this journey will end. You don't know what is on the other side of the tunnel, right? If you know what is on the other side of the tunnel, and if you only have to find a path, then that's not a research problem, right? So you have to have the willingness to explore, uncover unknowns. And again, you need to have willingness to take risk, try out unknowns, right? Why take risk? See, if you don't know what's on the other side of the tunnel, and still you have the courage to get into the tunnel and figure out what's on the other side of the tunnel, then that's the risk, right? And I've seen often students are not willing to take risk, and that's when they come up with ideas where the conclusion is already known. But that's not research, that's not exploration, and that cannot train you to become an independent researcher, right? And on top of that, as I said, hard work, talent, but then discipline. The discipline is also important, right? So discipline, what is involved in the discipline? Those who have the urgency to explore, right? So if I am curious, I want to find answers today, right? I cannot leave it for tomorrow. चलो आज इंडिया पाकिस्तान का मैच देखते हैं, कल देखेंगे. Correct? So I should have that urgency. If till I have not find the answer to that unknown or to that unsolved question, I should not be settled. Discipline in work and life, right? So consistency is very important, right? So what's the meaning of discipline here? Discipline means it's not like one day you work 16 hours in the lab and the other day you are sleeping all the time. You work 8 hours, but work consistently. You be involved in your problem, right? And then sense of detachment to be engaged in research 24x7. So again, 24x7 engagement does not mean that you are in lab all the time, right? The engagement 24x7 involvement means you are mentally involved. That's your first priority all the time, which means you have to have a detachment from all the other distractions. Distractions are always there, but you need to have that ability to detach yourself from other distractions and mentally be involved in your problem statement 24x7. And I can tell you, I can guarantee you that if you are mentally involved in your problem statement, if you're constantly thinking about the problem statement, no matter how deep fundamental it is, you will always solve this problem. Okay, so let's talk about the opportunities. Academia is what you always think of post PhD. So of course you can get direct faculty positions, postdoc, then faculty position. But then there are other threats too, which many of the PhD students or many of the students who are willing to explore PhD or do PhD are not well aware of. Industry positions. I mean, there are a lot of industries hire PhDs for some of the senior positions, right? In fact, in US and in Europe, particularly in the semiconductor, most of the R&D teams are always PhDs. You'll not find masters in those teams. If somebody says that it's an R&D team with full of masters, then that's not an R&D team, right? So there are a lot of industry positions in India and abroad. Of course, after postdoc, also you can get into take up industry positions. So, people think that postdoc means you have to become professor. That's not true. If you take up a postdoc position, you can always get into industry. Government labs and R&D labs, startups. Startups is also something one can think of. Often, startups, people think of startups as something to do with an app. That's not true. You can basically, if you hold a PhD degree, and if you have done something valuable in a field, if you have come up with a better solution, why not thinking of a startup? Why not thinking of a deep tech startup? There are a lot of investors willing to fund deep tech startups, but there's no good connect, right? The people who say they are having deep tech startup, they are not trained to that extent. And those who are trained to that extent, they are often not willing to get the startup route, right? Now, then I have a slide, which is about the return on investment. This is something which I added based on certain questions that came from my recent interactions with the students in IIT Hyderabad as well as in ISC. In industry, for example, the PhDs are usually paid better than masters and BTechs, and their growth is always either linear or exponential, but it never stagnates. And let me show you with this graph. I've just drawn it, so it doesn't look so good. Say if you are just thinking about how much you can earn. Of course, how much you can earn should not be the only objective. But if you have met the other objectives, right, in terms of becoming fantastic researcher, well-known expert in the field, then this comes naturally. So let me directly map it to this parameter as a function of number of years you spent. So say you graduate with an undergraduate degree, take 4 years, right? You start with a certain number X, right? And then you grow in industry, but you will see a saturation in the industry soon. This saturation, the same happens with a master's degree. You see a saturation. The only difference is the starting point could be different. Eventually, this gap, actually this is not very well quite clearly shown in the graph. The point where you saturate post BTech and post MTech is not too different. This delta is not too high. The starting point may be high, this delta is not too high, but the bottom line is they both saturate. If you hold a PhD degree and if you have done well in PhD, you start at a much higher number, of course, a little later in your life, in your career, but start with a much higher number, but you never stagnate, you never saturate. You always have exponential growth. And the point where you have this exponential rise always depends on to what extent you are, improving your skills, what was the quality of your PhD, and what was the field in which you have pursued PhD. The bottom line is you never stagnate. It always grows. The timeline, the cutoff point where it starts growing depends on some of the factors. Right? Now, another aspect that some students asked me was, what about the money I will lose during the period when I am not earning as a PhD student? So the amount of money you start earning, if you just do an area under the curve in real terms, in absolute terms, right? So you plot the accumulated sum as a function of time, you'll find that this will exceed the accumulated sum from masters or bachelors, which means beyond after a certain amount of years, you would have earned more amount of money, or you would have saved more money than this crowd, and then you have a further exponential growth. So it's about having little more patience in the beginning, right? This is also something which is said in the investment sector, right? The whatever gives you more return always takes a little more time, right? So if this is giving you more return, will always take a little more investment in the beginning, and that investment is the time, effort, hard work, patience. Okay, so this was about PhD and research and PhD process in general and what's the advantage. Let's talk about the myths and misconceptions, because this, I have realized that this eventually becomes the showstopper, and majority who might be interested or enthusiastic about pursuing research, they are often discouraged towards PhD journey because of many of these myths and misconceptions. The very first misconception or the myth is PhD, you do PhD if you don't get a job. This is a myth. You should not do PhD if you don't have a job, right? And also those who are pursuing PhD, seriously pursuing PhD, are not pursuing PhD because they did not get a job. They would have got a job. They would or would not have got a job depending on whether they looked for a job or not, right? But that's not true. And those who are pursuing PhD because they did not get a job, you can track their progress. They would not be doing well. But those who are doing well did not join PhD because they did not have a job. Now, if this myth stops you from getting into that path, because log kya kahenge if I get into PhD, log kahenge ki job nahi laga tha, right? This is what I heard often from students, that if I get into PhD, others will say, oh, this guy did not get a job, that's why he's doing PhD. So what? Let people say. I give an analogy to students in IIT Hyderabad. You would know that dowry is a problem in some of the states, and in some of the states in India, if you don't take dowry, people will say, oh, something was wrong with the boy, right? Are you aware of this? It's a fact. I learned it a few years back and I was surprised. No, I was married long back. Right. So somebody was telling me this. I will not name the states. The session is getting recorded. But this is a problem in some of the states. So what should be done? Should they take dowry? Of course not. Right. So just because some people will point finger on your credibility or your talent, right? That does not mean that you start taking dowry to justify that you are talented and there's no problem with you, right? The same here. If you are passionate, if you want to do PhD, do PhD. Don't worry about what others will say, right? They will say what they want to say. They will anyway say something. But few years down the line, when you are successful, the same people will tell you, I told you should do PhD. Correct? You'll always find such kind of people, in society. The same people will discourage you, and few years down the line, when you're successful, they will come and tell you that, I told you that you should do this. Okay, PhD means publishing papers. That's not true. PhD does not mean publishing papers and increasing your publication count. PhD, as I said, is a journey. Is a journey in which you become an independent researcher. You learn how to become an independent researcher, right? PhD takes too long, 5 years or more, is again a myth. On average, of course, it has been seen that it takes 4 to 5 years because of the rigorous training involved, but some can get trained and graduate faster, right? I joined IIT Bombay as a master's student in July 2006. I submitted my PhD thesis February 2010. So 3 years, 7 months, I finished master's and PhD. So it always depends, right? It depends on how much involved you are. But I can tell you, I spent almost 1.5 years permanently inside the lab. They still have my mattress. Yeah, I was told that they have not thrown it. It's been 13 years now. So, in fact, precisely 13 years. Today, I submitted my thesis. Okay, so 5 years or more, it always depends. It can be longer, it can be shorter. So I have seen the students always blame the institute, the supervisor, the department, but the student is not working, the student is not involved in that journey. Then how the student can reach to the end, right? As I said, it's a journey. So you take a bullet train, you will reach faster. You take a super fast train, you will take some less time. You take a passenger train, it will take even less. And if you are sitting on a bullock cart without a bull, then what will happen? Right? So again, I have read this often, 5 years will be wasted if you don't get results and papers. That's also not true. You are following that journey, right? You may or may not have enough papers, so-called enough papers at the end. But if you have learned, to become an independent researcher, if you have learned those skills, if you acquired those skills, if you have acquired that knowledge, that's what rest of the world is going to see in you, right? Majority of the good places are not going to judge you based on number of papers that you have. I often get applications from different places for postdoc. I'm interested in your group for postdoc position. I have published 25 papers in SCI journals. I have published 30 papers in SCI journals. I'm like, none of these papers are useful. So what do I do with these papers? And you interview these candidates, they are good for nothing. So of course, nobody is going to hire them. Nobody is going to recruit them. But then at the same time, I have hired people with just one paper, but they're fantastic. They're brilliant, right? So the real world is not going to look into your number of papers. I'm not talking about, tier 3 academia where they might be counting paper and, your selection will happen based on some parameter given to papers. But I'm talking about the place where your PhD will be respected, right? With the place where your skills will be respected. PhDs can only become teachers, professors, not have much opportunity in industry. That's also not true. Many years back, I used to hear that you do PhD only if you want to become a teacher. Even now, I see this perception among parents in general. If somebody goes and tell their parents that I want to do PhD, the parents will tell master banna hai. That's again a misconception. You don't do PhD just to become a professor. You become a professor, if you're not satisfied with the amount of unknowns you are getting in industry. So I moved from industry to academia because I was not satisfied with the amount of unknowns I was exposed to. I wanted to explore more, and I wanted to explore more unknowns independently without somebody from the administration telling me that only these are the unknowns that you can explore and these unknowns you cannot explore. That's why you get into academia. And of course, your passion for teaching, which happens side by side. But you don't do PhD to become a teacher or master, right? That's your choice. If you don't want, you don't become. You can get into industry. Now, stipend or salary is an often debated topic. I'm sure if I say stipend is enough, many of the PhD students are not going to like me. But let me tell you my perspective on this. By the way, when I was doing PhD, the PhD stipend was 8,000 rupees. MTech stipend was 5,000 rupees. And majority of this money was spent in mess fees and hostel fees and tuition fees. We were left with 500 rupees to 800 rupees to survive for the month. You have much more saving than what we had during those days. We could not think of going out on every weekend, right? Still, I'm in front of you. And that's why let me share my perspective. First of all, PhD is not a job. PhD is a training process, right? the institute, the government, the organization invest a lot of time, effort, money on you to become an independent research. On top of that, you're also given a stipend to survive. The reason it is called stipend, because this is money for your survival so that you're not dependent on others like your parents. It's not a salary. It's not called salary. It's called stipend because this is money, reasonable money given to you to survive. Now, in fact, what you're getting, you can still send some money back. Some of the PhD students in ISC, I've seen, they send some portion back home. At my time, this provision was not there, right? So if you see this as a stipend, as a support given to you to survive without being dependent on your parents while pursuing your passion, then you don't see a problem in whatever is given to you because it's still more than enough for your survival. And you can certainly go out on every weekend. You can or not, right? See, Bangalore is more expensive, right? And the area around ISC campus is even more expensive. And I see a lot of students around ISC campus. So I'm pretty sure they are having good time on weekends. And certainly the parents would not be paying them for having good time on weekend, right? So now, if you think in this way, what is given to you is good enough. Why you want to get into the negativity of, whether you are paid enough and, this is a less paid job and you are treated as, as a slave and things like that. This is all, if you dig deeper, majority of the people who are writing this on social media and various forums, majority of them are not PhD scholars. Majority of them write out of their guilt that they could not pursue that path and they want to justify that guilt. And some of them are PhD scholars who did not spend their time meaningfully. If you go and check their profile, you'll find that they are within the same institutes in the last 7 years, 8 years. So certainly they are frustrated. But why do you want to get dragged by this frustration? Right? Focus on your research. As far as the money given to you is sufficient enough for you to survive and you are not dependent on your parents or anyone else, right? You should be your focus should be in the problem that is given to you to solve, right? Now, PhD is a research job with almost zero payment. PhD is not a research job. Research job, postdoc is a research job, right? A position given to you in a R&D lab after PhD is a research job. PhD is not a research job. PhD is a training process. You are getting trained in that process, right? So think of the receivables that you are getting. Now, recently I read an article written by some journalist in Nature, scam of underpaid research job. Now again, many of these journals will write such articles to increase TRP. These articles also get citation, and their citation index increases, and therefore the journal impact factor increases. It just equivalent to writing a negative post on social media if you want to get more likes and comments, because the negativity spreads faster, right? Similarly, a lot of these journalists who are not scientists will write such articles. Nature will publish it because such papers will get a lot of views and citations, so the journal TRP will increase, and therefore the overall, the journal impact factor will improve, which brings the revenue back to the journal. So don't get trapped into these kind of articles. I hope Nature don't reject my paper after listening to this. Okay. Now, there's also often discussions in terms of comparison of the salary stipend with the certain European universities. You would have seen certain universities in Europe and in some other countries in the European region offer stipends which looks very interesting. 2,500 euros to 3,000 euros per month. But you have to understand that couple of aspects. One is the demand and supply. Are these universities offering anything better than what some of the top Indian universities are offering you? Possibly not. B, many of these universities don't have a proper PhD training program. Many of these universities basically hire these PhDs to send them to industry as a cheap temporary labor. So the way it works is that if an industry hires in Europe, and the labor laws in Europe are very strong. So if an industry hires in Europe, they basically have to pay higher, there's a lot of effort on visa, and then it becomes very difficult to fire. So now there's a route through university where university will hire as a PhD scholar, and then they are parked in an industry environment. You're not even trained on, like a researcher as one should be. As I mentioned in the previous slide, you're working on something day to day. Eventually you submit a thesis, you get some PhD degree. You will have a job assurity, but you're not an independent researcher. So if you are looking for a job and a pathway to get a job, of course, fine. But don't compare that with universities which are training you to become researchers, and in that process might be paying you less. Right? Now, if you talk about the fellowships such as PMRF, people say that they are not transparent. I can tell you, I have served in national committee as well as the institute committee. They're quite transparent. Now, going back to the stipend, shouldn't the stipend be competitive? Now, everyone gets a reference value, correct? Now, if you want to earn more, you have a lot of fellowship opportunities in the country. So why not you basically work a little hard and opt for those fellowship opportunities rather saying that everyone should get the same number? Now tell me, will you be happy if there are two people, say you are extremely smart, working hard, versus another one who might be talented at some point but not working at all, and they both are getting the same fellowship? Will you be happy? No. That's why there's a reference value set by our system. That reference value is good enough for you to survive. But if you want to earn more, you have a lot of these fellowship opportunities. PMRF, for example, offers 75,000 rupees per month plus 2 lakhs every month, every year for other expenses like international travel. What else you want? We did not have such things at our time, right? 75,000 rupees per month is more than enough, right? And if you think that you miss that 1 crore wala package, then that happens only in newspapers, right? Somebody will tell you that nahi, PhD karoge, then you will miss that 1 crore wala package. That does not happen in reality, right? But if you get into that path, certainly that can happen. That can become a reality. Now, PhD in India is different from doing PhD abroad. That's not true. Now, as I said, PhD is a journey. Now, the process that you follow, basically, you choose a vehicle to go through that journey, to follow that path. Now, you have to see who can offer you a good vehicle, right? Who can offer you a vehicle to basically go through that journey, right? Who can offer you a good problem statement, and who can offer you reasonable resources. Now, how is it related to which country you are in? In this whole process, what is important? The important is you should have a right mentor, right? You can be in MIT, but if you don't have a right mentor, your life will be miserable. You can be in some of the top institutes in India, right? But if you have a good mentor, you can do much better than some of the students in MIT or Stanford, right? So you need a good mentor. So in terms of PhD, you don't choose an institute, you choose a right mentor. So of course, the process is you have some idea of in which field you are interested, right? And then within that field, you figure out who are the best mentors. And then you reach out to them. They can be anywhere in the country, right? Just because somebody is in ISC does not mean that they are doing better work than somebody in NIT, in NIT or IIT, right? The ranking of the institute does not define how good research that you can do. Of course, the resources are also important, but say if you talk about some of the top institutes in any country, pretty much everyone would have same set of resources, right? So if resources are guaranteed, right, I mean that you're not deprived of resources and facilities, then you need a good mentor, not a high rank institute, right? So that one misconception that you have to change. Look for a good mentor. And in that sense, it could be anywhere. It can be somebody in Uganda, if you want to go there. Okay. So now, other misconceptions like, think twice for leaving industry job for pursuing PhD, or I already have an industry job, so why do I need to study more? That's again a misconception. I mean, if you have a job and you think that I already have a job, so why should I leave it for PhD? If you are thinking this, then you don't have that risk-taking ability, then PhD is not for you. And if you have the risk-taking ability, then you go for it. And PhD, as I said, is not to eventually get a job, right? So you might be doing something. That does not mean that after PhD you will do pretty much the same thing. You might be doing something which is more day to day. Tomorrow, after PhD, you might be solving some of the very fundamental problems for industry. You may be making impact at a larger scale, which is not possible if you join industry at an early age. Now, this is another, I would say, perception problem that I see across students. So I often see students telling me that their PhD is in fabrication or characterization or simulation. In general, they always tag a tool with their PhD. I mean, a tool is just a vehicle, right? Tool is just one of those vehicles that you have to use in that journey. Your PhD is not on a tool, right? Your PhD is on a problem. So don't think that you want to do PhD in fabrication or characterization or simulation or whatever, design or modeling. PhD is a journey, right? And in that journey, you pick a problem that excites you so that you're motivated throughout that journey, right? And then for that problem, whatever skill set you need, you acquire that skill set. Whatever tool set you need, you acquire that tool set, right? But don't start with a tool set that, okay, I will use this tool for my PhD. That's never the right approach. PhD is an extended project work. That's also not true. And this is what creates the confusion about this, less paid research job and all. PhD is not a project work, right? As I said, PhD is a journey. So a project or a problem statement is given to you as a vehicle to, go through that journey. But it's not a project work that you are hired to work on a project and your job is to deliver that project. Okay, PhD candidates in India mostly suffer from funding shortage. Funding need to be raised by students. This again misconception. Students don't need to raise funding for their research. It is the job of their advisors to raise funding, right? How many of you think that PhD students need to worry about the funding? So I read it in some of the forums where students were complaining that in India, PhD students have a funding shortage. PhD students don't need to worry about funding at all, right? MTech is a must for PhD, so the UGs are not here, but this was a message for them that they can join PhD directly after undergraduate. There are direct PhD programs in pretty much all the institutes. So masters is not mandatory in between. You can directly join for PhD after undergraduate. So I hope you can tell your undergraduate friends and juniors. This is something which I have seen sometimes students tell me during the interview. They think that if they have an industry experience, they are better suited for PhD or they can do better in PhD. That's also not true. Having industry experience means you have experience on certain skills, you have operated certain tools, you have worked on certain engineering problems, but that does not mean that you have already acquired certain skills to pursue research. So don't get confused that somebody having industry experience is better suited for PhD and vice. And in other words, to be better suited for PhD, you have to first gain some experience. There's no correlation between you having some work experience versus how good you would be in your PhD. Of course, if you have a certain work experience, that can make you a little more organized. If you're a little more organized, you would be a little more organized while conducting your experiments. But that does not mean that you have to gain an industry experience for pursuing PhD, right? And this is what sometimes master students tell that, I want to first gain some work experience and then think of PhD. And I can tell you that once you are out there, once you have lost that momentum, then it becomes very difficult to come back. And once you have tasted the blood, it becomes very difficult to leave it. Here the blood is the money, the salary, right? And yeah, the PhD is all about bookish ideas, they lack hands-on experience. Again, that's not true. If you're working on a good problem at a good place, you have a lot more to learn and you would have developed a lot more expertise and skill set than anyone else could do. And therefore, the PhD is not about bookish ideas a lot. There's a lot of hands-on involved in PhD. This hands-on could be anything. This hands-on could be experimental. This could be computational. This could be theoretical. This could be modeling. But there's a lot of hands-on involved in PhD, without which you cannot go on that journey. So I'll stop here, and now 1 hour over, and this is time where I'll take your questions, and we can have anything from you. Any question you have in mind, any more misconceptions that you have, feel free to share. Yeah, well, after this. See, the first, any research proposal should have following 3 components: what, why, how, right? So what you want to do, what is the problem statement, right? Second, which is even more important, why you want to do what you want to do. Okay. And the third, how you propose to go on that path. So what, say, you start by saying that, okay, I want to solve this big problem. That's fine. But then you justify that why you want to solve that problem. What will be the implications of the solution? Why that problem need to be solved? You prove or justify that this problem is a major rate limiter or showstopper in so and so field. And by solving this problem, the following big things can be achieved. But now this is still fantasies. The last part is the reality. That what is your hypothesis? How do you propose to solve the problem? Again, when I say how do you propose to solve the problem, does not mean that you already have the conclusion, you already have the solution. But you should have some thoughts on pathways that you are going to follow, right? I mean, say for example, if I'm trying to solve a problem which is specific to India, social problem is specific to India. If I go and start increasing awareness in US, it's not going to solve the problem, right? So if you have understood the problem, if you are able to break the problem into bits and pieces, then you should be able to give directions that, okay, this is my hypothesis, that the problem could be because of so and so, or because of so and so, or because of so and so, and then you justify, you put a rationale that why you think that the problem could be because of so and so, right? So this is your hypothesis. And once you have a hypothesis, then put a pathway by which you will prove or disprove your hypothesis, right? So that's where the critical thinking comes into picture, that how critically you can think about the problem and give some thought to possible directions in which you are going to conduct your research. If you can capture all of this, you will have a fantastic research proposal. And then once you have done this, the last component is when, which is the timeline. So you also need to put some timeline that, okay, reasonably within this timeline, I can finish these milestones, and hopefully by this point I will have the end goal achieved. One of these paths will take me to the end goal. What is the end solution? That is not known, right? But it is somewhere hidden behind this tunnel, and these are the pathways to cross through the tunnel. Okay, did I answer your question? Almost. What's the missing point? Where is the gap? Attractive, which solves a problem which is of interest to majority. Okay, so I mean, attractive to whom? Attractive to the peer group, right? So if others are also trying to solve the same problem, right, then that problem is an attractive problem. So see, there are two kinds of problems. One is a problem which is attractive, which is of interest to majority, which is of interest to the peer group. Other problem is fabricated problem. The fabricated problem is never attractive, because the fabricated problem you fabricate to do something, right? To write paper, to get money or whatever, but that never attracts majority. The problem which is known to everyone but nobody is able to solve, that's the problem which is attractive, and a proposal written on that problem is attractive. So if you remember this slide, do you see any bullet point which says you need to upfront know a lot? So this is another misconception, that students think that I can pursue PhD if I know a lot. No, you will learn a lot in this process. As far as you have this aptitude, if you are able to put the right questions, if you are able to ask what, why, how, if you have willingness to explore unknowns, and of course, if you have the talent to learn unknowns, right? If you are a good learner, right, then that's the path for you. It does not mean that you need to know everything upfront and then only you can think of PhD. In fact, in PhD interviews, we don't test the depth of the knowledge, or let me correct this. We don't test the depth and breadth of the knowledge. We test depth only on one subject to see whether whatever you say that you are confident about this, whether you have gone into the depth. It can be anything, right? If you say I'm confident about Hindi literature, then you better be confident about Hindi literature, even if you are applying for PhD in computer science. right? So when you say I'm confident about this particular subject, then you are confident about that subject. You prove that any subject that you take, you're able to dig into the details, you're able to basically learn it like anything. And then the other aspect that we test are these aptitudes, right? We don't test whether you have depth into the entire spectrum, because that will be offered to you. You will be given the spectrum, you will be given the depth on various aspects. That's where I said, right, willing to learn complex skill sets, complex subjects, right? You have to have the willingness, and just prove that you have the ability by talking about that one subject, right? Okay, thanks for the second point. The first point, honestly speaking, I have never digged into the depth of all these parameters, though I have some uh, idea of how it works, but I have never looked into the equations or tried to figure out how to use these equations to get better impact factor. I mean, I would say, I would basically put it in this way, that you should not be worried about the journal impact factor, right, or where you publish. As far as you are publishing at a place where majority of your peers are, right, even if that place is not having very high impact factor, say for example take IEEE transactional electron devices, right, it has less impact factor than some of the materials journals, right, chemistry journals, right, but this has more impact in terms of electron device and in terms of electron device research within industry and academia, right? So should I worry about this impact factor and think of how to publish a GAN-HEMT paper in a chemistry journal? Or should I focus on publishing or doing good work in GAN-HEMT that my peers accept that work as a good work? As far as I'm able to do a good work, which my peers accept as good work, right, it does not matter where you are publishing, right? So journal is important to an extent that your work gets enough visibility. That's it. Any more question? There was something from here. Yes. As you mentioned that not that right. Recently, we are seeing the decline in the number of institutes. Our institute is something that basically, where is the problem? There is a system. How can we? So you rightly said the problem is across institutes. Now the my understanding, and this is a social science problem. My understanding of particularly our system is that things are a lot driven by still the survival in our system, and when it comes to survival, the parents play a very big role in the decision making. I also chair the microelectronics MTech program in ISC, and every year in the beginning of the first semester and the end of the first semester, I'll conduct a session with them to figure out how much they are interested or aligned towards doing PhD. So at the beginning of the semester, more than 50% would be somewhere in between, that they are interested, but they want to figure out if there are other parameters that are going to define their decision. There are around 10% who are very clear that enough is enough. I'm going to grab a job and done. No more studies. And then they are around 35%. We're very clear that I'll do PhD. Now, a semester down the line, when I do the same session in the beginning of the second semester, by the time they would have learned what kind of placement opportunities are there, by the time they would have learned what kind of placement their seniors would have got, what kind of packages people are getting, and not only them, their parents too. And by the time they would have been enough influenced by their seniors, their parents, other people in their hostel mess and whatnot. And if you do that session after 6 months, 9 months, majority are in the bucket where they are very clear PhD nahi hona, or in the bucket where they want to do PhD but their parents are not supporting them. Some of them might be using parents as a excuse, but I know that majority, and I can sense that majority where they have this genuine interest, but they are forced that, this is enough. If you are going to get 30 lakhs, 35 lakhs after masters, why do you want to study more? This is more than enough for us. So when the assessment happens based on what you get in the end and whether this you will earn and how much you want to earn and how much you have to earn, when everything is evaluated based on that, you have distractions such as what parents will tell you, what your neighbors will tell you, what your seniors will tell you. Now to change this, the only way to change this is to increase awareness. And a lot of these misconceptions are also because the students don't know what is PhD. I mean, just few days back, I was having a similar session with master students in ISC across the entire division, computer science, signal processing, control, microelectronics, whatnot. And majority were not clear. Why should they do PhD? So if they are not clear, why should they do PhD? And they're not willing to figure out why should they PhD. And they all only go through what is written on social media or Quora or LinkedIn, right? And if that misconception is not clarified, then there's no solution. But if we clarify this misconception and we also clarify the misconception in the society, all the way going down to their parents, then gradually this problem can be solved. So again, any problem which is related to society takes time and it requires constant push, right? It's like developing good habits. You're always seduced to do things which are easier. You're always seduced to follow shortcuts, take shortcuts. You're always seduced to basically do things which can give you a quick success. You're always seduced to do things which may not be appropriate, but as far as nobody's watching you, you tend to do that. And the good habits come with practice and time and constant encouragement and motivation. And go through that journey, you get into that journey. So before I take this question on this note, I hope all of you can then further educate others why they should do PhD. And all the PhD students, I hope, will talk more positive about PhD. Even if they are having difficult time in their PhD, they talk positive about PhD. Right?
Question is, what are and what ought to be the factors of the forces which work as propellers of research and help us in setting our research goals? Second connecting question is there any difference between the...
I would ask you to repeat your question.
What are and what ought to be the factors of research? I mean, which work as propellers of research in setting and help us in setting our research goals. And is there any difference between the two? What are and what ought to be?
Okay. Not sure if I really understood your question, but let me give it a try. Let me simplify your question and you tell me that whether I have understood your question. So your question is, in simple terms, what will push you to do research? Correct? Now, if that is the question, that I mean, see, the push can come from anywhere. It can be, it always sounds nice to say that the push has to come from within and from your, interest to explore more. But the push can be anything else. The push can be to do better in life. The push can be to become better in life. The push can be to become a complete package. The push can be to do better in your career. The push can be to earn more in your career. So whatever is the push, let it be. Right? Don't limit yourself to one type of push. Right? The end goal is that what is the bottom line is that whether you are able to get into this journey or not. As far as you are able to get into the journey, sidelining all the misconceptions and getting into the journey, you should be happy. Even if that push was to basically earn better in life after a few years. What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, I was asking what ought to be the factors, and do you find any difference?
Okay, now it clarifies. So what are the various push across students and what should be the push? But I think I answered you. Let it be any push, right? As far as you are able to get into that journey, you should be satisfied. Now, what are the pushes? There can be various pushes. Some people are seriously, genuinely interested in exploring more. Some people are basically willing to invest more time in the quest of getting a better life, getting a better career, right? It could be anything. Some people are just inspired by someone else. I want to become someone like that, right? Push can be anything. As far as you're doing the right thing, it doesn't matter what the push is or what the push was, right? Today your push could be something, tomorrow your push could be something else. Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed it, and as I said, I hope you spread positivity. On a lighter note, the invitation was lying in my inbox since some time, and I actually had forgotten it, that I have to reply to this email. And then one fine day, I read a comment on LinkedIn. Somebody said, look at this professor from ISC, he has so much time. These ISC professors also have so much time that they are wasting time on LinkedIn. And it was a topic related to stipend, where I had said, somebody has written a negative post, and I just said that, these are myths, and better not to be carried away with the negativity. And then, some who were frustrated started. So the gentleman who commented was an IIT Jaipur PhD student. So I recollected, oh, I missed an invitation. I have to reply. Let's go there. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful and informative session and enlightening us with your valuable informations and the knowledge. Like, as you say, if you know what steps you are following, means you are not doing the unknowns, which means we should always explore the unknown. And PhD is a journey, not a research job. And one should always demonstrate on their ability to research independently. Thank you so much, sir. Now our second session is post lunch. So as we know, the time is approaching for the lunch. So we will carry on with our second session after the lunch, that is at 2:30. And I request all of you to assemble before 2:30 p.m. Thank you.